The knock wasn't frantic, not aggressive, just rehearsed. 3 taps. A pause. 1 more, slightly louder. Like someone who wanted to seem polite but wasn't. Denise exhaled and wiped her hands on the front of her jeans. She already knew who it was. No need to check the camera. That rhythm had been walking up to her door for the past 6 weeks, wearing a pressed polo shirt and a plastic smile. She opened the door slow. "Afternoon, Miss Phelps." Barbara Phelps tilted her sunglasses, down just enough to peer over them. "Afternoon, Denise." Her voice dripped with that southern syrup softness that meant nothing sweet. "Just a quick concern I wanted to bring to your attention." Again. Behind her, the sun gleamed off the neighborhood's identical mailboxes, perfectly trimmed grass, and the uncomfortable quiet that always followed Barbara. Denise could still hear the faint giggles from the living room. Her 2 sons and one of the neighbor girls were working on multiplication tables with dry erase markers on the window glass. Barbara didn't glance inside, but her tone sharpened like she had. "We've had another report about excessive noise during non-school hours. You understand we just want to maintain the peace, especially with property values being what they are." Denise didn't flinch, didn't nod, didn't smile, just asked evenly, "Was it my sons or the math problems that disturbed the lawn values today?" Barbara's nose twitched. "It's just a concern. Several neighbors have mentioned it now. The HOA board has guidelines about, well, gatherings, especially recurring ones. This is a family neighborhood, not a school zone." Denise's fingers curled around the edge of the door. "Is there a decibel limit on children learning, or just on children like mine doing it?" Barbara blinked. Didn't answer, didn't need to. She just tucked a folded notice onto Denise's porch table like she was setting down a casserole dish. "Just a friendly reminder, have a blessed day." The woman turned and walked off, steps light, head high, like she hadn't just handed over the 3rd informal violation notice in 2 months. Denise waited until Barbara rounded the corner. Then she picked up the paper. Same wording. Unapproved use of residence for organized activity. Same threats of fines. Same signature. But something in Denise's chest didn't tighten this time. Didn't sink. It clicked like a key turning. She looked toward the house next door, the one that'd been empty since the Wilsons moved out last winter. Beige, silent, untouched. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Then, without another word, she stepped back inside and closed the door behind her. The tutoring session continued, but Denise's mind was already drawing blueprints. The listing was still up. Denise sat on her couch later that night, laptop propped on one knee, a sleepy 7-year-old curled against her side. Her older son had fallen asleep on the floor beside a half-finished worksheet, the kind of quiet mess Barbara Phelps would probably categorize as domestic disruption. She clicked the link again just to see it. 3-bedroom, 2-bath, priced below market. The Wilsons had been trying to offload it quietly after some messy divorce business. The HOA didn't like that kind of thing in their newsletter. Denise didn't. Smile. But something settled behind her eyes. She bookmarked it. By Friday, she'd scheduled a viewing. The realtor met her with that tight, overcompensating smile. Young, eager, already using words like investment opportunity and perfect for resale. She didn't ask who Denise was buying it for. She didn't ask how Denise planned to finance it. Denise didn't offer anything beyond a handshake and a nod toward the kitchen. "I'm going to need to know how the windows face and whether the floor supports can handle bookshelves." The realtor blinked. "For resale? For children?" A week later, Denise sat in the bank with a portfolio that said what she hadn't at the door. 4 years of slow saving from tutoring 3 kids at a time. Side contracts doing curriculum planning for the community center. She didn't dress up for the meeting. No blazer, no heels. Just a plain shirt and a folder full of work she never got credit for, and never needed to brag about. The loan officer took one look at her numbers and gave a quiet, "Huh," like he was surprised. Denise didn't flinch. When he asked what, she wanted to call the purchase, she paused. Then she said it like it had already existed. South Creek Learning Home, non-profit. The paperwork started moving faster than expected. The Wilsons just wanted out. And Denise, for the first time in months, didn't feel like she was reacting to the neighborhood. She was rewriting it. She started walking the perimeter of the house each afternoon after picking up her boys, measuring porch light angles, counting electrical sockets, mapping where a long whiteboard would fit best. Mrs. Jackson, 2 doors down, called out one evening, "You moving, baby?" Denise shook her head. "No, Mom, just expanding." She didn't explain, didn't say anything to the HOA, not yet. Let them think she was just tired of the complaints and quietly fading out. Let them wonder why she smiled when they ignored her at the mailbox. Let them sleep on it, because next month those same children they tried to silence would be learning louder, legally, and Denise would be opening the door from the other side. Barbara Phelps nearly tripped over her own feet when she saw the U-Haul. It wasn't the usual kind of move-in. No furniture, no couch-lugging men. Just Denise in soft-soled sneakers, unloading crates of labeled books, plastic tubs of markers, and collapsible reading cushions. One by one, slow and calm, like she wasn't in a hurry, like she had time. Barbara stood across the cul-de-sac, under her porch awning, trying not to stare, but her mouth parted just slightly. The Wilsons' house had been empty so long she'd nearly gotten used to the silence. Then Denise wheeled out a freestanding dry erase board and carried it through the open front door like she owned it, because she did. Inside, the air smelled like fresh pine floors and old dreams. Denise ran her hand along the windowsill of the back room. It would be the reading nook. She already had sheer curtains that would soften the light for the kids who squinted too much or lost their focus halfway through a sentence. Her sons helped paint the front room. The younger one smeared turquoise on the baseboards, and instead of scolding, Denise just laughed and said, "Good, now it's officially ours." She didn't announce it, she didn't need to, but by the second week word spread fast. Parents from 2 streets over showed up at her door with hands folded, kids in tow. "Are you still taking readers?" "My daughter's behind. She's in 3rd but still reading at a 1st grade level." "I heard you helped that Johnson boy pass his math test. Can you look at my twins?" Denise listened. Wrote names down carefully in a notebook with a green ribbon. One by one she told them, "We're not a business, this is a learning home. No fees, no noise complaints, just sign here. We're registered as a 501c3. The real letter to the HOA arrived 2 days later. Not a complaint. A copy of her tax-exempt approval, her business license for educational service, and a notarized letter stating the property was now owned and operated by South Creek Learning. Home Inc. Barbara Phelps received it in her HOA inbox and frowned at the seal. Legal, clean, bulletproof. At the next HOA meeting, she folded the paper and cleared her throat. "There's a new development. It seems Ms. Moore has opened some kind of charitable organization next door." Someone muttered, "Is that even allowed?" Barbara pressed her lips together. "It is. Technically, there's a non-profit exemption clause under the fair housing section. She's within her rights." A silence spread through the room like spilled coffee. "She's smart," someone said quietly. Not admiring, not angry, just surprised. Barbara didn't reply. Later that night, Denise sat alone on the front steps of the new house. No porch light yet, just the soft blue glow from inside. She sipped tea from the same chipped mug Barbara once called unsightly in a walk-by comment last summer. And for the first time since moving into South Creek Estates, She felt like she wasn't just surviving the rules, she was rewriting them. The first time Barbara heard the laughter, she looked up from her glass of Chardonnay and squinted toward the window like it was a new kind of storm. It wasn't wild, it wasn't late, but it was joy, loose, full-throated, and impossible to ignore. Children, dozens of them it seemed, though in truth it was just 6. A small reading circle had spilled into the yard next door. One child was giggling through a vocabulary flashcard game. Another held up a self-made comic book, earning applause from 2 girls sitting cross-legged on the porch steps. Barbara's hand tightened around her wine glass. She closed the blinds. On the sidewalk, a woman with silver braids and a canvas tote paused to watch the scene with a soft smile. "You always knew how to build community," she said, as Denise adjusted the paper canopy over the kids. Denise looked up and grinned. Didn't have to build, just had to let it breathe. The woman chuckled. "Well, breathe louder then. Some of us waited too long for quiet to mean more than silence." They nodded to each other like old neighbors. Even though they'd only met 2 weeks ago at the ribbon cutting, Denise hadn't told the HOA about. By the 3rd week, Denise's front lawn became its own kind of rhythm. Kids left their shoes, in neat rows by the doormat. Watercolor paintings fluttered on a string across the porch railing. A handmade chalkboard leaned against a mailbox, etched with words we learned this week: courage, pattern, belonging. Inside, the air smelled like lemon oil and washable markers. Denise had rearranged the living room to be floor-friendly. Beanbags, lap desks, one corner with a big soft rug and books sorted by color, not because it was trendy, but because kids who didn't read well still liked reaching for something beautiful. Every detail was thought out, and none of it looked like resistance. But it was. The next HOA meeting didn't mention Denise directly, but Barbara Phelps cleared her throat and raised a new concern. "It's not just the children," she began. "It's the increased traffic, the drop-offs, the pickups. We have ordinances about volume." Someone chimed in. "Are there even that many cars?" Barbara's lips thinned. "I counted 7 on Thursday. That's above average." "But they're not parked long," said Mr. Ramirez, who lived down the block. "And she waves, friendly too." Barbara blinked. "That's not the point. It's the principle. Rules are meant to protect the neighborhood," Ramirez said, his voice calm, "or to keep it quiet enough that nobody notices when it stops growing." Barbara's jaw twitched. That night, Barbara walked past the tutoring house just after 6 p.m. The porch light was on. Children's voices rose in laughter from the side yard, where someone was balancing books on their head and trying not to drop them. One of Denise's sons clapped and cheered for another child who'd gotten through a tricky paragraph. Barbara didn't pause, didn't comment, but as she turned the corner, one of the children looked up, a quiet boy who rarely spoke during reading. "Circle." He watched her walk away and said, "She never smiles." Denise didn't answer, just handed him the next flashcard. "Let's work on empathy," she said softly. And they did. Barbara filed the next complaint anonymously. It came typed, not handwritten, and slipped under the HOA's clubhouse door, in a manila envelope. No signature, no return address, just a formal grievance: unauthorized use of adjacent property for youth programming, concerns about safety, supervision, and disruption. Denise didn't flinch when she heard. The HOA president, an older man named Roy Bennington, mentioned it in passing while watering his hedges. "Looks like someone's trying to build a case against you," he said, flicking water droplets off. A leaf like it was a metaphor. "But that house is in full compliance. No zoning violation, no breach of covenant." Denise raised one brow. "You memorized the bylaws, Roy?" "Ma'am," he said, grinning. "I wrote half of them." They exchanged a knowing look, one of those quiet truces that only exists between people who've lived long enough to recognize dignity when it walks past them. By the end of the month, Denise's non-profit was fully registered on the county's public portal. South Creek Learning Home Director, Denise Moore mission: to provide equitable access to learning resources for underserved and underrepresented youth in suburban districts. She pinned the certificate behind a glass frame just inside the door. Let it speak for itself. She also made copies, just in case. Barbara's last play came wrapped in politeness. She requested a neighborhood compatibility review, a clause buried deep in the HOA bylaws, typically used to block overly bright porch lights or backyard sheds. She submitted it under the guise of maintaining cohesive neighborhood aesthetics. Denise received the notice on a Tuesday morning. A printed form, signed this time. Barbara had written in neat cursive, "The signage, foot traffic, and activity level may not reflect the intended residential character of South Creek Estates." Denise held the paper for a moment, then calmly turned and walked into the next room, where a group of children were tracing vocabulary words into flour with their fingers. She didn't say a word to them, but later that evening she made one call. The hearing was scheduled. HOA board, Denise, and one unexpected guest, Kendra Lee, civil rights lawyer, parent, and, as it turned out, godmother to one of Denise's students. She showed up with a soft, grey suit, a portfolio, and the kind of silence that made men stop mid-sentence. When Barbara began her statement, "We're simply concerned about the direction of our community," Kendra calmly opened her folder and slid a copy of the Fair Housing Act across the table. "No clause in this HOA charter supersedes federal protection against coded restrictions," she said, her voice even. "This review, by language and intent, treads dangerously close to violating civil precedent on community discrimination, especially when directed at children of color gathering for educational enrichment." Barbara's throat moved, but no sound came. Kendra folded her hands. "Would you like to proceed?" Roy Bennington leaned forward. "I believe we're done here." That night, the sidewalk outside Denise's house was covered in chalk drawings, words like focus, believe, and future in swirls of green and purple. None of the children admitted who wrote them, but every one of them knew they belonged. Barbara Phelps released the spring HOA newsletter without a single mention of South Creek Learning Home. No photo of the ribbon cutting, no paragraph on the community tutoring initiative, no line welcoming new developments, or celebrating local education efforts, just an editorial about preserving the neighborhood's tranquil spirit, and an announcement about a new planter ordinance. Denise read it on her porch with her tea. She smiled, not because it surprised her, but because the silence was louder than any headline. Inside, the tutoring center had grown in quiet ways. 3. More volunteers now came weekly, 2 retired teachers and 1 high school student earning community service hours. Mrs. Jackson from down the block baked muffins every Thursday. A Spanish-speaking dad helped with bilingual materials. One Saturday, the kids planted sunflowers in recycled paint buckets out front, and one of the boys whispered, "It looks like a real school now." Denise crouched beside him, hand on his shoulder. "No," she said, "it looks like yours," but not everyone was pretending to ignore it. At the next HOA meeting, Roy brought it up anyway. "There's been an increase in foot traffic near Lot 18. That's the Wilson property, now owned by Ms. Moore." Since some folks have expressed concern, Barbara tensed in her seat, but Roy kept going. "I just want to clarify for the minutes that South Creek Learning Home is in full compliance, tax-exempt, federally protected, and frankly a benefit to our community." A murmur of agreement. A few nods. Barbara cleared her throat. "But the increased noise," Roy raised a hand gently. "Barbara, your complaint was reviewed. We've already closed the compatibility review. If there's a new concern, it'll need to be submitted in writing. Another pause. Barbara sat back, lips pressed tight. The man beside her, a quiet neighbor who rarely spoke, leaned toward her and said, not unkindly, "Maybe it's time to let good things grow." Back at the learning home, the kids had just finished a project on kindness. They'd written letters to the people they admired, some to teachers, some to parents, one to a bus driver. One girl, no older than 8, handed Denise a folded paper that read, "To Miss D, you make me feel smart even when I mess up." Denise held it for a long time after the girl skipped outside. She didn't cry. She just stood by the window and watched the light fall across the chalk-dusted porch, where children who had once been silenced were now learning how to speak, write, and belong. And across the street, behind stiff white blinds, Barbara Phelps turned off her porch light early. The neighborhood had changed. It just hadn't asked her permission. So it started with a flyer, just a single sheet of cream cardstock tucked into mailboxes, not loud, not glossy. At the top, in soft gold letters, "Open House, South Creek Learning Home, come see what we're growing, no RSVP required." No sales pitch, just Saturday 2:05 p.m. light refreshments, student-led tours, quiet joy encouraged. Barbara Phelps read it at her kitchen table, her lips pursed. She set it down like it might stain the wood. Her husband, Frank, glanced at it. "You going?" She didn't answer. That Saturday, Denise stood at the front walkway as sunlight streamed through the tree canopy. The porch had been swept clean, the chalk drawings refreshed by tiny, eager hands. Her folding table held trays of cornbread muffins, sweet tea, and stacks of student poems bound in yarn. The first to arrive were the Jacksons, then the Kumars from 2 streets over, then Mr. Ramirez, who brought his niece. More came. Parents, elders, even teenagers, all quietly curious. They moved through the rooms slowly. Each space told its own story. In the corner labeled Writer's Nest, a boy in a red hoodie read from a story he'd written about a superhero whose only power was understanding people's pain. He stumbled on some words. No one corrected him. He kept going. In the math garden, flashcards were folded into origami flowers. A third grader explained patterns using sunflower seed spirals she'd drawn herself. Everywhere there was color, not chaos, laughter, not noise, a fullness that felt whole. Barbara didn't walk over, but she watched, from behind her living room curtains, through a gap no wider than a hand. Watched as families she hadn't spoken to in months gathered and nodded and smiled. Watched a neighborhood she thought she controlled gather around someone she'd tried to push out. She didn't know what stung more, the fact that they were theirs or the fact that they weren't surprised. At the end of the tour, Denise gathered the visitors under the old tree out front. Children sat cross-legged in front of her, adults forming a quiet ring behind. She didn't give a speech. She didn't have to. She just said, "Thank you for letting us show you what learning looks like when it doesn't have to ask permission." Some pause, one heartbeat. Then someone clapped, slowly at first, then more, not loud, but full. That night, long after the guests had gone and the porch light flicked off, Barbara Phelps opened her email. She clicked New Message, typed the subject, Chelsea Community Reflection Proposal. Then she hovered, stared at the blinking cursor, backspaced the title. Instead, she wrote 3 words. I was wrong. She didn't hit send, but she left it open, and that was new. The flowers bloomed late that year, sunflowers, tall and defiant, nodded in the breeze along the fence line of Lot 18. The chalkboard out front still bore the week's words, Legacy, Light, Listen. Inside, the children were tracing constellations in glow-in-the-dark paint. Denise moved slowly between them, her fingers stained with marker ink and the soft dust of stories told 100 times. Someone knocked at the door, not the sharp kind, not rehearsed, just uncertain. Denise opened it to find Barbara Phelps standing there, holding something small and awkward in her hands. A loaf of lemon bread wrapped in wax paper, edges just slightly overbaked. Denise looked at her, not cold, not surprised, just steady. Barbara didn't meet her eyes at first. "I saw the garden," she said, her voice lower than usual. "It's beautiful. My mother used to grow those sunflowers." Denise nodded once Barbara shifted the bread in her hands. "I'm not here on behalf of the board, just me." Faye paws stretched out between them like a rope neither wanted to pull. Then finally, "I didn't understand before what you were building." Her voice faltered. "I thought it was about change, but it was about care." Denise took the bread, not as an offering, not a surrender, just as a gesture. "Children don't change neighborhoods," she said quietly. "They show us what was broken in silence." Barbara nodded once. The wind rustled the sunflower leaves beside them. Then she turned to leave, not in shame but with something loosened, a weight unhooked. 2 months later, the HOA newsletter looked different. No editorial this time. Just a centered photograph. 3 children holding up handmade signs in front of South Creek Learning Home. First book read alone. First essay turned in. First time feeling smart. Below it, Community Spotlight, a Garden of Growth signed. With gratitude, B. Phelps, HOA Communications Chair. That evening, Denise walked home from the community mailbox, paper in hand, and paused under the porch light. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. Inside, her sons were helping pack literacy kits for next week's session. In the corner, a child was asleep in a pile of storybooks, hand still clutching a crayon. She stood there for a long moment, letting the quiet settle. Not the silence of being silenced, but the calm that comes after something has rooted deep, strong and undeniable. Then she stepped inside and closed the door.